What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Johners. This is episode 40, and today's a special episode where we're actually interviewing one of the brightest prospects on the UK indie wrestling scene at the moment, Sean Kustom. So we interview Sean. You'll hear all of my questions very, very shortly. There's some listener questions thrown in there as well. Get to hear all about Sean's beginning, how he first came across professional wrestling, how he first became interested in becoming a professional wrestler, and kind of all of his successes both in Australia and on the UK scene. So lots of really kind of interesting answers from Sean about his career and about his plans for the future as well. But before we speak to Sean, I just want to throw out my usual plugs like I do at the beginning of every single episode. You can reach out to Wrestling with Johners on Twitter. It's twitter.com/withjohners_pod. So that's at withjohners_pod on Twitter. You can reach out to us on Instagram. That's instagram.com/wrestling with Johners. Or you could go and join our ever popular and ever entertaining Facebook community page, our Facebook group. Just go onto Facebook and search Wrestling with Johners. That's JOHNERS, Wrestling with Johners. Find the logo, tap on the logo, and ask to be part of that group. And as always, you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, Podcast Addict, Anchor, Castbox, Stitcher Radio, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We are literally everywhere. And don't forget that if you're listening on Apple iTunes, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and leave a comment there. And if you do, I'll happily give you a shout out on a future episode of the podcast. But without further ado, here is my interview with Sean Kustom. Right, welcome back, everybody, and we've got Sean Kustom with us. And Sean, thank you very much for dropping on the podcast. It's great to be speaking to you today. Thank you for coming along.
No worries. Thank you for having me on your show, John.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. I know that, like I say, you're a lot of my listeners and social media fans out there are big fans of yours, so they're going to be looking forward to this podcast dropping. And I've actually got some listener questions in the interview as well, so I can't wait to ask them a little bit later on. But the first question that I have for you, Sean, is you've been wrestling all across the UK for the last couple of years now. There's obviously a lot of fans out there that are becoming more and more familiar with you and your amazing in-ring work. It's clear that you're obviously building quite an impressive fan base everywhere you go, but I'm intrigued to find out where it all began for you. And this is a question that I always ask, kind of where did you first come across professional wrestling as a youngster? Kind of when did it first hook you, and when did you first fall in love with professional wrestling as a sport from the very beginning?
Yeah, to kind of touch on that, like I feel like my introduction into professional wrestling, it was a little bit funny. Like I kind of got introduced to it through it by a PlayStation game.
Right.
I'm pretty sure it was just called WWF Raw.
Yeah.
And that was like the first time I became aware of professional wrestling. So once I got into the game, I thought, this is amazing. What's this? And then once we got cable TV in Australia, I was able to then find professional wrestling on there. So it just kind of like popped up there and then popped up here, and then just that's obviously over time I just fell in love with professional wrestling. So
yeah, and kind of growing up, who were some of your favourite wrestlers? Obviously, you probably had your favourite character that you were playing on that computer game. But when you got cable, I'm guessing that you had WWF or WWE. What were some of your kind of favourite wrestlers growing up? And do you think you've tried to kind of emulate or model yourself on any of those favourite wrestlers? Maybe they've influenced you in your wrestling style from them early days.
Yeah, so when I first became aware of wrestling, like the two biggest stars at the time was The Rock and Stone Cold. Yeah. So hands down, it's completely because of those two and like the rivalry that they had for a few years. They had was one of the greatest rivalries I've ever seen, and it just drew me in as a fan. And like still thinking about it, I'm still a fan of it. So
yeah,
it was just amazing what those two could produce. But in terms of like if they were to somewhat like influence me or like inspire me as a wrestler. They definitely inspired me as a wrestler, but I definitely don't wrestle the same as them.
No.
I believe I have a very different style. I try to make sure that like my wrestling style is quite diverse. Like I kind of touch on all areas where it would be like hard hitting, or it'd be high flying, or technical, or something like that. So that's try to what I.
Well, I've seen quite a few of your matches, and you do have quite a mix of styles, and you can mix it up with a different, a variety of different opponents as well. So, quite impressed with what I've seen. So, a bit of a hybrid wrestler, would you describe yourself as?
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. So, I want to talk a little bit about the wrestling scene in Australia, which is fast becoming one of the hottest wrestling scenes in the world right now. There's definitely a flourishing indie scene. There's promotions out there such as Melbourne City Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Australia, two of the more well-known companies over in Australia. But what was the scene like when you were breaking in, and kind of where were you trained when you were first starting out? So kind of how did that all come together?
Okay. So this is once again kind of a weird thing for me, and how I got like kind of introduced into professional wrestling. So in Australia, like there's really only promotions in the major cities in Australia. So we're talking about Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide, and Brisbane. So it was really strange to me because I'm from a small town called Port Macquarie, which only has a population of maybe 40,000 people. That there was an actual wrestler in Port Macquarie that had his own ring and had his own training school. So it was just really strange to me that thinking that there was only professional wrestling in the major cities, it was actually one of my own hometown.
Yeah.
So I actually started there, and he unfortunately didn't have too much experience under his belt, so he could only teach me so much. But it was a good starting point because then it got me connected up to Sydney. So after a year of training there, I went up to Sydney and I started with Pro Wrestling Australia, and that's pretty much like my home company that kind of grew me into the professional wrestler that I am today. So I started back with PWA in like 2010, and the scene back then is quite different to what it is now. Everyone's a lot more like welcoming. There's not too much of just the wrestlers stick in that one promotion. So say if like the PWA homeboys, like they kind of branch out more now. So they kind of travel to like the MCWs and the EPWs, and they all kind of help each other out in a way. Whereas back in the day, they wouldn't really do that too much.
Right.
And that's why I think Australian pro wrestling is starting to pick up. There just seems to be like a little bit more of like a fan base that's growing, especially for the hardcore fans.
Definitely. So as you touched upon there, you've been wrestling since 2010. That's correct, isn't it, Sean? 2010. And you've been wrestling pretty much exclusively in the UK for the last 2 to 3 years now. What was the driving force behind you wanting to move to the UK to continue your kind of growth in professional wrestling? So I think you've been in the UK for the last two and a bit years.
Yeah, it's only been actually a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
However, I was here approximately 2.5 years ago, but I was only here for a month.
Right.
I did a few shows then, but since then, like obviously I went back to Australia. I spent another year in Australia, and then since then, I've been here for about a year and a half now.
Yeah, but a big move for you.
Yes, yes, surprisingly big move. Yeah.
And what was the driving force behind that then?
Well, the driving force was really just time. Like with my age, like I'm 27 now, but like I kind of needed to make a jump if I wanted to have like a good crack at being a professional wrestler as a full-time job. So I felt like I needed to make that leap, and the UK scene was just definitely the easiest option in terms of getting a working visa, in terms of making sure there's like enough workload to make sure that I can make a living off wrestling. So UK was definitely the best option. So that's what drew me towards coming over here.
Excellent. So something I want to touch upon. You wrestled in the first ever WrestleGate Pro match. It was an exhibition match against Robbie X at a Future Shock show in January. You've also been closely associated with WrestleGate Pro since then, and you've been a regular fixture on their shows. They've had a couple of shows, Open Gate and Enter the Dragons, as well as a three-way exhibition match for WrestleGate Pro, which took place in Germany in March, I understand, as part of the 16 Karat Gold weekend. But how did you first become involved with WrestleGate Pro, and how did you first of all become part of that awesome exhibition match in January against Robbie X? It must have been a great honour to have been involved in that inaugural match for WrestleGate Pro.
Yeah, it definitely was a great honour to perform in the very first match to WrestleGate. So I feel very honoured, and it was just amazing to be a part of as well. So I first became aware of WrestleGate via Gary Ward, but I knew him at the time just as a photographer. So I didn't really know too much that Gary's like dream or like his goal was to eventually do a show. It wasn't until he was ready to like announce all of it that like WrestleGate was a thing that he opened up to me about that. So I've always kind of thought Gary was quite a close friend to me. Like he helped me out a lot, made me feel comfortable and welcomed to the UK scene. So I definitely wanted to be a part of his show.
Yeah, no, Gary's definitely a good guy, really is. Now, your next match for WrestleGate Pro is on May the 18th at the Rushcliffe Arena in Nottingham, and it's against Chris Ridgway. And we're all looking forward to that match. It's going to be an amazing match. It's expected to be fast-paced and hard-hitting, and a great battle between two of the brightest workers on the UK indie scene. But what are you looking forward to most from that match against Chris Ridgway?
Yeah, well, Chris is one of those guys that he's made like a really good name for himself, and his wrestling style is amazing in itself. And I don't think that I've really wrestled anyone quite of his caliber as well. So it's going to test me in a way. So I'm looking forward to it. And it will be a first time singles encounter for myself and Chris as well. So. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that bout with him.
Yeah, it should be fantastic. So 2018 was an amazing year for you. You were the Relentless Division champion for Kamikaze Pro, and I think you held that title for over 6 months, as well as being the Southside Tag Team Champions with Zaya Brookside. That was for another 2 months. Are there any championships out there that you have your eye on or would like to be challenging for in the near future?
Definitely two titles that come to mind at the moment, which I'm kind of working towards, is the Southside World Heavyweight Championship,
right,
and also the Kamikaze World Heavyweight Championship. Fantastic title as well. So both the two main titles in the two main companies that I'm always at. So. Fantastic.
Yeah. And so focusing on more present time, we mentioned earlier, 2019 has already been a very busy and very successful year for you already, possibly your busiest year in your 9-year career so far, and we're only into May. With that, do you see 2019 as being a defining year for you, kind of like a bit of a launching pad year that's possibly going to propel you onto bigger things in the future?
Yeah. I'm definitely saying that 2019 is going to be the launching pad year, and then 2020, that's going to be my year. So
fantastic.
I'm calling that now.
Excellent. Yeah. No, we'll look forward to that. But I've got a listener question for you, Sean, and this is from Adam on our Facebook group. Adam asks, how does your in-ring character today differ from when you first made your debut?
My in-ring character. How does it differ from today? It's definitely a lot more wiser in the way that I wrestle. Definitely have to wrestle a lot more carefully and smarter in a way to ensure that I get a more longevity pro wrestling run. So it's just a lot more wiser and smarter in that sense.
Yeah.
In terms of my wrestling ability, but in terms of character, like I've always kind of portrayed myself as my actual own personality. Like I wasn't really pretending someone that I'm not. Like I'm not really pretending to be someone that I'm not.
Sure.
So I'm not being fake.
Yeah.
So.
No, that makes perfect sense. Another listener question, and this is from Dolores on our Facebook group. Who has been your toughest opponent to date, Sean? So who has been your toughest ever opponent?
I really don't think there really is someone that I can define as my toughest opponent. As all wrestlers are very durable and tough. Like that's why they do it.
Yeah.
But I'd probably say like the hardest hitting was Ryback for sure.
Wow. Okay.
Definitely Ryback. Yeah, I wrestled Ryback back in Australia about 2 months before I came over to the UK, and I wrestled him 2 nights in a row at Rock and Roll Wrestling, and both those nights I just came away very, very battered and bruised and quite sore. So
he's not exactly gentle in the ring. Then he definitely means it when he lays it in.
Yeah, you could say that. We've just also got to recognise as well. He is a large human being.
He is a big unit,
so
definitely. Yeah.
Like without him meaning to be like hurtful or anything like that, it's just his size. You just can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a fan of Ryback. I like Ryback, so not going to say anything bad against him, but he's a good guy.
Yeah, he was really good to work with as well. Real genuine dude. So hopefully I get to step in the ring with him again.
Excellent. So I've got one final question for you then, Sean. This is the biggie. Yep. So do you have any ambitions to wrestle in either the United States or in Japan? And if so, where does that fit in with your kind of overall timeline or your overall goals? So the States and Japan, where does it kind of factor into your goals?
Yeah, they definitely are a factor into my goals. The kind of thing that I want to do now is basically wrestle in every country that I can on the independent circuit, and then once I've kind of done that, then I would like to kind of knuckle down and maybe lock in a contract with someone.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
So that's the goal. So eventually get to the US and get to Japan. They're the two main ones. But if I can get to like Mexico and stuff like that, even Ireland, I haven't been there yet. So
yeah.
And any and every country.
There we go. So America and Japan, watch out. Sean Kustom is on his way. But Sean, it's been lovely speaking to you today. I really, really appreciate your time. Before we go, where can my listeners find out more about you? Where can they reach out to you on social media? Do you have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So I've got all those social media accounts. It'll just be Sean Kustom. So that's SEANKUSTOM.
Excellent. Well, yes. So go out and find Sean on social media. But Sean, once again, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. And have a great weekend. Catch you with you soon.
Thank you very much.
Well, there you go. That was my interview with Sean Kustom, the Thunder from Down Under. An excellent guy. Great interview. I've seen quite a few of his matches. And an excellent wrestler, and look out for his match against Chris Ridgway at the next WrestleGate Pro show in Nottingham. Really lovely guy. Really enjoyed speaking to Sean. Lots of interesting insight into what got him interested in wrestling and becoming a professional wrestler. It looks like he's on to. He's already had a fantastic 2018 and 2019, and like I say, we're barely into May this year. So no doubt 2019 will continue to be a successful year for Sean, and the future is in his hands. I think the world is definitely his to be taken, so best of luck to Sean Kustom there. So I hope you've enjoyed this special bonus episode of Wrestle with Johners. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe, don't forget to hit like, don't forget to shout about this podcast, tell your friends and tell your family all about Wrestling with Johners, and keep listening to the podcast for all of your weekly NXT UK, NXT and WWE updates. We'll probably have more interviews in the pipeline. I think there's one or two that's going to be dropping fairly soon. More news to follow on that on our social media pages. And remember, if you're listening to this on Apple iTunes, don't forget to give us a 5-star review. And if you do, we'll give you a shout out in a future episode of Wrestling with Johners. That's all for this episode. I'll be back later on in the week with another episode of Wrestling with Johners, where we'll be covering NXT and NXT UK. But in the meantime, take care and speak to you all soon.